hasn't been done yet. So that's what the alpha privative does in Greek. It sticks an un or a non or something like that in front of the word, negating the term. So in this case, we would expect it to be, if oros is hour, period of 60 minutes, we would expect this to be not an hour or something like that. But instead it means untimely. Hence, horos, hora can mean timely. And then pro-horos means before the time, premature. So we're not talking about before the hour, before the fixed period of 60 minutes, but rather before the right moment has come. So that's one way that it can be used. Then second, a special use of hora is the best time in the year. So it can mean the right time, the fixed time, the favorable time, or the best time. And then it can also mean the time for human suffering or the time for human action. So when a person's particular moment has come, again, it's not a 60-minute period of time, but it can be a time when a person shines, or it can be a time of great suffering. So it's used, for example, of a woman when her time of labor has come. This is her hour, the moment of great suffering. And then it can also mean the time has come, meaning the time which God has appointed. God has fixed a moment, fixed a time, and it has come. So these are all the ways that it can be used, not just in John, but in general, and not just in the Bible, in general Greek literature. So with that being said, let's start looking up these verses. And we want to go to John chapter 2, first of all. John chapter 2, verse 4. Now in John chapter 2, Jesus has been invited to a wedding at Cana. And the mother of Jesus seems to be able to boss people around at this wedding, which suggests what to you?
Level of status.
What's that?
Potentially a level of status.
Okay. Now what would cause a person at a wedding to have significant status?
Relative.
Organizer?
Relative.
What was that?
Relative.
Relative, yeah. And if we put those two together, that's what I think we're dealing with here. Probably this is a family wedding. And the Blessed Virgin Mary seems to have a particular interest in the fact that they have run out of wine. Now, if you go to a wedding and they've run out of wine, you're probably just going to sit there at the table and complain or say, oh, how sad that they didn't organize properly. But if you get up and start bossing people around, that means that that you have a more significant role than sitting at the table and browsing. So she goes to Jesus and says, they have no wine. And he says, what do you want me to do about it? Which is kind of what he says. He says, ti emoi kai soy gunai, which I like to say this both to my wife and to my mother, and it really irks them both, which just makes it terribly great fun. It's really difficult to render into English. Ti in Greek means what in this case. Ti emoi, what to me, is what it means. Kai soy, and to you. So what's this to me and to you, or what does this have to do between me and you? And then he calls her a woman, guna, which sounds just so terribly patriarchal or chauvinistic or misogynistic. I could call my wife woman, but I prefer to, have dinner tonight. So it's not a good idea. But in this case, I think that it's more of a term of respect. She is being likened unto the woman. We are reminded of the first woman, Eve, who gives birth to humanity. So what is this to me and to you, woman? My hour has not yet come. So we have to ask, what does this mean? Does this mean my period of 60 minutes has not yet come? Probably not. That doesn't make a great deal of sense. So it must mean that something significant is in the future for Jesus, a moment of great significance. So what is that? Now, she goes on and instructs the deacons to do whatever Jesus says. And so he does actually rescue the situation by pouring water into the water pots that are set there for purification. And then it concludes, this Jesus did, I think it's verse 11 in chapter 2, manifesting his glory. This is his first sign where he manifests his glory, doxa. So something may be connected with hour and glory. Hour and glory. So Jesus performs this miracle, this sign, as John calls it, but he is pointing us forward to something significant that will happen in the future for Jesus. And quite possibly it's connected with Jesus' glory. So now is not the time for my glory to be manifested, but in some way he does manifest his glory. So we have to ask ourselves and keep that in the back of our mind, what is the glory of Jesus? Paul, did you have a question?
I was wondering, has he been baptized yet? By John?
Yeah, that's in chapter 1.
Okay.
The baptism.
I thought maybe that was
encounter. Yeah. So, but that's a good question and something to think about. So, my hour has not yet come. There is an hour of significance for Jesus. Did it not work?
There's battery asking me the other ones.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. Yeah.
So, as far as we know.
You're fixated on this Boston people around at the wedding, aren't you? No.
No, but I'm obviously fixated on the little side issue. So, up to now, he's done nothing that we know of. And yet Mary asks him, or tells him. So, that indicates
mom.
that Mary knows he can do something.
Well, she did have that little visit from the angel.
It wasn't a few years ago.
Yeah, true.
And so,
It's,
but is that true? We don't know
Maybe
anything
it's-
about his early.
maybe it's possible that she just wants him to fix it, not necessarily miraculously fix it, but just fix it. You know, the way the way that a mother might do with her trusted son. Fix this problem. Yeah. So, I don't know what to do. Son, help me. Maybe all that it is, quite possibly. But we shouldn't discount the fact that she does have some inkling that this boy is rather special and so forth. Yeah. So, and maybe Joseph is not in the picture at this point. Hard to say. I think Joseph is probably dead, but we just don't know. Yeah. So, okay. So now let's go to chapter 4. John chapter 4, verse 21. Now this is the encounter with the woman at the well, and the woman has had 6 husbands, and she's now with her husband. Or is it 5 husbands? I can't remember. But anyway,
5.
she 5 husbands, and the man you're with now is not your husband. You've spoken truly, he says there. It's great. And the conversation then turns towards truthfulness of worship. The Jews say we worship on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, and the Samaritans say the proper place for worship is Mount Gerizim in Samaria. So which is it? And Jesus then says to her, verse 21 of chapter 4, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father." So there is an hour coming, an hour of alteration of worship, a transformation of worship, not in a particular locale. Now look at verse 23. "But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. For there is an hour coming in the future, and indeed the hour has now arrived, the moment, the right time, the right season." So there's an anticipation of an hour, but there is a sense in which the hour has already come or is already upon you. It's beginning to break in, is the idea. Now, let's go to John chapter 5, verse 25. "Amen, amen, I say to you, an hour is coming, and is now here, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. So, the anticipation of an hour, it's coming, and indeed it's already here. So the idea of in the future, but already. Theologians refer to this as now, not yet. So I could ask you, Andy, are you saved? Yes, but are you risen from the dead? Not yet. Yeah, it hasn't happened yet, and yet you could say it already has happened. When? When did you get saved? When you were baptized. So it's already happened, but it also hasn't happened yet. So now, not yet. There's an hour that's coming, but indeed it's already here. And we can think of it as, with Jesus, it is already breaking in on the world, but it hasn't come to its full manifestation yet. The bell hasn't finished chiming. It's begun to ring. Now, continuing the thought, John chapter 5, verse 28, do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice. So, there is an anticipated hour that is going to bring about resurrection. So, Jesus' hour has not yet come. There is an anticipation of an hour where worship will be transformed. There is an anticipation of an hour where the dead will be raised. So, transformation of worship, dead being raised, and Jesus' glorification. Remember that. Now, going to John chapter 7, verse 30. John chapter 7, verse 30. So they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him, because his hour had not yet come. There are a number of these kinds of events in the Gospels where they want to kill him, or they want to arrest him, but he avoids it. He slips out, or they don't raise a hand, they're not able to, in this case, lay a hand on him. Why? Well, we really want to kill him, but Jesus has said not yet, so we'll hold back. No, he slips away, gets away, and I think that there is probably a manifestation of his divine power in the same way that he walks upon the water, miraculously feeds the loaves, that kind of thing. He vanishes from their sight, he passes through them. This is the exercise of his divinity. Normally, as Jesus is going about, he does not exercise the divine nature. That's called the state of what? What is it, Fritz? Humiliation. The state of humiliation is not him being pummeled and caused to suffer, but it is the setting aside of the exercise of the divinity. He doesn't use the divinity. Could he have turned stones into bread? Absolutely, but he doesn't. He suffers. So he goes through everything as a man, suffering. But there are times when he does exercise the divinity, and we can put those into two categories. One, he exercises the powers of his divinity for the purpose of helping somebody. So he feeds the hungry, he heals the sick, he raises the dead, these kinds of things. And then there are other exercises of his divinity that either serve to manifest or prove his identity to the people, or in this case, not to escape because he doesn't want to suffer and die, but rather because it's not the right time, it's not the fixed time, it's not the appointed time. That is yet to come. So there's an hour that is coming, but it's not yet, so they don't arrest him. Now, same idea in John chapter 8, verse 20. These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple, but no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. The moment hasn't come, therefore he's not going to be arrested. So we're being pointed towards suffering, crucifixion, punishment, death for Jesus as part of his hour. The hour has not yet come for him to suffer and to die. Keep in mind, the first iteration of hour back in John chapter 2 was in connection with the manifestation of his glory, his doxa. Now, let's spend a little bit more time in John chapter 12. We want chapter 12, verse 23, but this is the encounter with the Greeks. And these, I believe, are Greek-speaking Jews, but there could be among them God-fearers, people who are converted to Judaism but are not ethnically Hebrews. So let's look at verse 20, John chapter 12, verse 20. Now there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast. Greek here doesn't mean people whose ancestry is in Athens, people who predominantly eat gyros or something like this. It means people who speak Greek, and so it could be God-fearing Gentiles who have become Jews, or it could be Jews who had been carried off into captivity and whose primary language is now Greek. And in any case, this becomes a trigger for Jesus. Then they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and asked him, saying, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip came and told Andrew, and in turn Andrew and Philip told Jesus. But Jesus answered them, saying, "The hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified." So this becomes a trigger for Jesus. Now that the Greeks have come to him, now the hour has come. The moment has arrived. Now, when is this all taking place? Run back in the chapter to verses 12 and following. What is that? Palm Sunday. So John is 21 chapters, but in the 12th chapter, we're already at Palm Sunday. So chapters 12 through 20 all take place over the course of a single week. What we really have is an extended meditation on the Passion in John's Gospel here. So Palm Sunday, triumphal entry. He's been hailed as king. Now the Greeks come to him, and Jesus says, "The hour has come." The hour has come for what? For the Son of Man to be glorified. That's the same word as in John chapter 2, where Jesus makes the water into wine, and by this, John tells us, he manifested his glory. So there's glory manifested in the transforming of water into wine, but there is a glorification which is yet to come, the true glory, the real glory. Now, if you think, just in general usage, about that term glory, glorification, glorified, what would that entail for a person in this world, in this life, to be glorified? What would it mean to have glory?
Fame.
Fame? What sort of position are we talking about?
Person who's been glorified, exalted, leader of some sort,
King, emperor, leader, top quarterback in the NFL, MVP of the NBA, championships, something like this. Somebody with a tremendous amount of fame, glory, power, authority, wealth, influence, something like that. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. What's that? So continue on, verse 24. Most assuredly I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much. New King James says grain. It's karpos, fruit. He who loves his life will lose it. He who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Does this sound like glory? Death, burial, destruction, losing your life in this world. Verse 27, now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, but for this purpose I came to this hour. Not a period of 60 minutes, a moment of glorification. And how does Jesus feel about it? What's that?
Could it be an event?
Yeah, well, yes, but our question is, what is it? Is Jesus excited about this hour? Now my soul is saying, "Whee!" This is not Monty Python. Guys on the cross kicking their legs and singing, "Always look on the bright side of life." I mean, it's a fantastic bit of movie making because it's so ridiculous. It's so the opposite of what it actually is. Jesus is referring to the hour of his suffering, the hour of his trouble, as his hour, his moment. Now skip down to verse 31. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. Who's the ruler of this world? Satan, the devil. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples to myself. Don't read the next verse. What does that sound like? Most people hear this verse, when I'm lifted up from the earth, and they think this is a reference to Jesus' ascension. It has nothing to do with that. This he spoke, the succeeding verse says, signifying by what death he would die. So he's speaking about the manner of his dying, being lifted up from the earth. Throughout the Gospels, not only in John, throughout the Gospels there is this motif. The Jews, if they're going to kill somebody, are going to do it by what? Stoning. But Jesus is not going to die a death by stoning. He's going to die a death by crucifixion, being lifted up from the earth. So this is his hour. This is his hour of glorification. Verse 28, Father, glorify your name. So glory is going to come to the name of the Father, the name of God. So there is an hour that is coming. It's an hour of glorification, but paradoxically, it is an hour of suffering. Paul.
But, okay, can you separate the crucifixion from the ascension? Or is it all rolled into one?
We might...
Because ultimately he's glorified with the
You
ascension.
can, properly speaking, have the ascension without the crucifixion, so in that sense. But let me flesh it out this way. Excuse the pun, we can clear in a moment. Man is a dying creature. Man has entered into a condition of mortality because he is cut off from the life of God, from the Spirit of God. Man was always made to be dependent upon God, to be dependent upon receiving his life. Man, having rebelled against God and having lost the Holy Ghost, no longer has life within himself. And there is no hope of man restoring his condition. Therefore, the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, takes on human flesh for the purpose of uniting the human nature to God and restoring life and the spirit and a condition of immortality and a condition of communion with God to mankind. So Jesus, having come into the flesh, suffers and dies in the flesh, thereby bringing all mankind, all human flesh, into death and into suffering. Rising again from the dead, the ascension is the bringing of the human flesh back before God, back into communion with God. So ultimately, no, it's all of a piece. The incarnation, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the ascension. But we might put it this way, the ascension was always the goal, but not for Jesus to be ascended, but for us to be with him before the Father, so that our flesh will live before God, that we will live before God. So no, we shouldn't separate them. However, we can, in the sense of looking at what their meaning or their purpose is. Each has its individual part to play. So the hour of Jesus is going to be the hour of his glorification, which paradoxically is the hour of his death. Now, chapter 13, verse 1. Chapter 13 makes a transition. We have entered into now the upper room, and we're going to stay there from chapter 13 through chapter 16. This all takes place on the night when Jesus was betrayed. These chapters 13 through 16, moving into 17, are referred to as the upper room discourse. 17 is in the Garden of Gethsemane. So chapter 13, verse 1 is the introduction to this section, which we could say is the second half, second portion of the Gospel of John. So somebody read out for me chapter 13, verse 1. Michael, would you do that for me, please?
Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end.
Okay, so his hour has come. This is it. This is the thing that John's gospel has been preparing us for throughout. There is an hour that is coming for Jesus, and it's now here. And this hour is for the purpose of doing what? Loving the world, loving his own, the ones who have been given to him, the ones that he cares for. So his hour is connected then with his end. And that word telos means goal, conclusion, culmination, not just termination. And that's the same word, as I think I've told you before, as appears in John chapter 19 when Jesus says, "It is finished." His end in chapter 13, verse 1 is telos. Jesus says it is finished, it is to telestai. Same word, it's just made into a verb there. So his goal, his conclusion, his culmination, why he came into the world is for this hour, the hour of his suffering and crucifixion. So all this refers to Jesus' hour, which is his death. Now, we're going to switch gears as Jesus is going to talk about another hour. John chapter 16, verse 2. Jesus is preparing his disciples for the suffering that will come upon them later when they are commissioned. So he says in John 16, verse 2, they will put you out of the synagogues, meaning they will excommunicate you. Indeed, the hour is coming when whoever kills you will think he is offering service to God. Now skip ahead to verse 4. I have said these things to you that when their hour comes, not their hour, the hour of the people, but the hour of the things. When their hour comes, you may remember that I told them to you. So there is an hour coming, and what can we say then about this hour? What will it bring for the disciples? Trouble. What did you say, Paul?
Trouble.
That was you. And
I said that they killed.
they'll be killed, precisely. So there's an hour coming for Jesus. It's the hour of his glorification, but it is the hour of his crucifixion and suffering. Now, we find out there is an hour that is coming for the disciples, and that's the same kind of hour, the same kind of suffering. Not in the sense of redeeming the world, but what Jesus endures, they also will endure after a fashion. An hour of suffering, a significant and critical moment. Now, same chapter, verse 21. When a woman is giving birth, she has sorrow because her hour has come. But when she has delivered the baby, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being has been born into the world. So there is an hour that is coming, and many regard this simply as just sort of a parable or an illustration. Jesus is using the occasion or the illustration, the example of a woman suffering when she gives birth. I don't think that it's just, hey, I'm going to tell you a story now. I'm going to use a little illustration. But rather, what did we find out about the mother of Jesus back in John chapter 2? What did Jesus call her? Woman. Yeah. And this is not derogatory or chauvinistic, but rather it is intended to liken her to the woman, which is Eve, the first woman, our first mother. Mary, who is never called Mary in the gospel, is woman or mother. And it's a strange way of speaking. Jesse, did you, upon the birth of any of your children, say, behold, a human being? What? I mean, you probably knew in advance, all girls. How does that work? You are just surrounded by estrogen. It's going to be a challenge. Thank God for a little boy that's coming into the Lewis family. He's going to, begin to restore a little balance and order to them. to the family. But nobody says it's a human being. Maybe they ought to, given the slaughter of the holy innocents that is taking place in our day. But we would say it's a boy or it's a girl. But this is an anthropos, according to John. So it's maybe not such a bad translation. It's just not what any parent would say upon the birth of a child. But what's happening? The woman suffers, gives birth, and there is a human being that has come, a true human being, a true man, who brings joy to the world. Who's that? The son of the woman, namely Jesus. Now, when you hear about suffering in childbirth, what Bible passage should that bring to mind? Genesis, the curse, chapter 3. What's the curse that comes upon the woman? Sorrow in conception, pain in childbirth. So the birth of Jesus from this woman is deeply connected to the curse and its reversal, the curse and its undoing. So this is not just an illustration of a critical, troubling moment for a woman, namely the perilous hour of giving birth, but rather the hour by which all things are reversed. The human being, which is Jesus, the true man, behold the man, has come into the world. So, there is an hour coming, back to the hour of the disciples, John 16, verse 32. Behold, the hour is coming, indeed it has come, when you will be scattered, each to his own, and will leave me alone. So, the hour of Jesus' suffering is also going to be an hour of panic and trouble for the disciples. The disciples' hour and Jesus' hour is connected. Suffering for Jesus, suffering for the disciples. Now, John 17 begins the high priestly prayer. John 17, verse 1, Jesus prays, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you. Glory is where? When Jesus is lifted up from the earth. This is Jesus' glory, his suffering for mankind. The hour has come. This is the hour of Jesus' glory. Now, moving into chapter 19, verse 27, and Jesus said to the disciple, Behold your mother. And from that hour, the disciple took her. All the translations say something like this. They try to explain it. Took her to his own home. And indeed, tradition has it that Mary goes with John to Ephesus. But rather, the idea here is not the special relationship between John, the evangelist, and Mary, the individual woman, but rather a new family is being created. A new family where Mary is the mother, is the church, and John is the disciple, is you, the one whom Jesus loved. And they are joined together in a new household, which is the church. That's what's happened to each one of us. We've been brought into a new household. So from that hour, there is a new union, a new family, a new church, not centered around circumcision and the laws of Moses, but gathered around the cross, the place of Jesus' glory. That's where they are, standing on the cross. When Jesus is lifted up from the earth, he is going to draw all peoples to himself. In gathering, in John's Gospel. And so the hour has come for this union. So the hour of Jesus' suffering is now also the hour of rebirth for the world. Rebirth in the creation of the Holy Church. Now, let's switch gears and go to the first epistle of John. 1 John chapter 2. Children, verse 18. 1 John chapter 2, verse 18. It is the last hour. And as you have heard that Antichrist is coming, so now many Antichrists have come. Therefore, we know that it is the last hour. Keeping in mind everything we've heard about the term hour in the Gospel of John, now in the first epistle of John, he is speaking about this present time for the church as being the last hour. It's, in its naked form, a period of 60 minutes, but in this form, it is a period of at least 2 millennia, perhaps many more millennia, or perhaps this afternoon, or later this morning. We don't know, but this hour is the last hour of the world, the last moment of the world. It is a time of suffering, it is a time of judgment, but it is a time when the eschaton, the glory of God, is going to break in on the world, and indeed already is breaking in on the world. How? Not through crowns, thrones, extraordinary power and pleasure and wealth and fame. But the hour breaks in when sins are forgiven. And this conflict with the world system, which cares nothing for the forgiveness of sins, but rather with sin as much as possible. So the hour has come when Antichrist rules, when Antichrist prevails upon this earth, and it is the last hour. This is it. So the more you focus on the stuff that this world counts as glory, the more you are missing out on what is truly the last hour. The world is floating through the last hour unawares that its moment has come, the moment of judgment, the moment of chaos, the moment of destruction, but also the moment of redemption. Now, 2 passages in Revelation. Not everybody agrees with me. That's okay. But I think that John also writes Revelation. That's the traditional position. You can sell books and gain a certain amount of fame for yourself within churchly circles by inventing a new theory. And that's fine. But sometimes it's good just to stick with what the church has always said. Because people knew more than we did, the ancients. So maybe St. John really did right. John chapter 14. Let's start at the beginning of the chapter, even though the verse we want is verse 7. Start at the beginning of the chapter. And I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion. With him, 144,000, having his father's name, that is the father of the lamb, written on their foreheads. Now, what's significant about the number 144,000? Yeah, so we could do 12 times 12 times 1,000. So 12, we think of the Old Testament, we think of the sons of Jacob, we think of the tribes of Israel. 12 is Israel. How many disciples of Jesus? 12. New Testament, Old Testament, put together. 12 times 12, 144. And then because 1,000 is an awesome number, let's multiply it by that. Dealing with an idea of magnificent completion. So those who think that there are only 144,000 golden tickets, and if you miss out, you're not going to get one, too bad. But those who want to take this super literally don't always like to take it as literally as they could, or as they should, because who are they in verse 4? These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. So we're dealing with men who are virgins. So anybody that wants to count up 144,000, as there are some aberrant church bodies that do, really ought to take this part of the equation into their calculation as well, which they don't. No, so it's just intended to be symbolic of the comprehensiveness of the church. The Old Testament, the New Testament, the fullness of the number. That's all it's
So if they came to my door, I could throw them off by saying, how can you take this verse?
Well, what you should do is invite them in and say, I'll listen to your doctrine and you'll listen to mine. and then go get your catechism and talk to them. But above all, keep them at your house as long as possible, because that will do what?
Keep it in mind.
Yeah, keep them persuading other people. And who knows, maybe you'll actually plant a seed. So they stand before the throne of God, and then there is the everlasting angel who preaches, or the gospel preaching, the angel preaching the everlasting gospel, and his preaching in verse 7, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. The hour of his judgment. So we have the hour of Jesus' judgment, where he takes on the world's judgment to himself. We have the hour of the apostles' judgment, tribulation, and suffering in this world. We have the last hour, and then we have this hour of judgment where all things are going to be remedied in this world. There is going to be a restoration where those who have suffered will be lifted up, and those who have made themselves mighty will be thrown down. And then the last instance of significance, I think, is in chapter 18. What we have here is the suffering of Babylon, which is not the city, the ancient city located in Iraq, but rather it is the world city, the capital of the world. It is the emblem of all that this world has in opposition to God. That's Babylon. It's also Rome. So the kings of the earth who committed fornication, verse 9, and lived luxuriously with her, with Babylon, will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city. For in 1 hour, verse 10, your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth, business, corporation, will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. It is the greatest of all Wall Street crashes. It's all come crashing down, and there will be no recovery. So merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, iPhones and iPads and iMacs and Lexuses and Mercedes and BMWs, all coming to destruction. Their worth is gone. Now, verse 16, they all cry out, alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. So there is an hour that is coming when the entire system of the world will be thrown down. So you have 2 hours to choose from. You can embrace the hour of Jesus, gathered around the cross, going with him to your own death and suffering, or you can throw yourself in with the merchants of the world, corporation, all who seek pleasure, and this is the hour that you will get, the hour of complete annihilation and destruction of all things. So those are the 2 hours that you have to pick, and that's what I think St. John has set up in his writings. There's the hour of travail now, the hour of suffering, the hour of birth pains, the hour of Jesus' glory, which is his suffering and crucifixion, which we as disciples of Jesus also will participate in. Or there is this hour, the hour of great judgment and calamity. That's what St. John is setting up. So those are your 2 choices. Here in Eastertide, we throw in our lot with Jesus, the risen one, counting on his promise to bring us also from the grave. Questions, comments, thoughts?
Is aura and the verb tense aorist, is it linked somehow?
I have no idea, but that's it wouldn't surprise me.
I know aorist is a timing thing, somewhat.
Right, yeah. Aorist, at least in Greek, is this, it happens in a moment in the past. It's a moment. You can block it off. There it is. It's over and done. Yeah, I have no idea. It's an interesting question. Wouldn't surprise me. So, all right. Well, let's conclude with prayer and go to divine service. Heavenly Father, we praise and thank you for your Son, our dear Lord Jesus Christ, taking on our human flesh, suffering the hour of tribulation and judgment, which is the hour of his glorification. Keep us in that hour with your Son. Strengthen us as we suffer in this life. Bring us safely through the hour of judgment and condemnation, that we, rising from the graves, might live forever with you, the Lamb, and the Holy Spirit in the eternal habitations. The same Jesus Christ our Lord.